Is there precedent to De Beers cancelling a site as it did last month? And if so, what was the effect of withholding rough goods from the market in the 12 months that followed that decision? That was a question a viewer sent me last week, and it sparked my curiosity. To bring you up to speed, a site is a De Beers sales event during which it supplies rough diamonds to its site holder clients, those companies which have long-term contracts for the miner's rough production. The company hosts 10 sites every year on a predetermined schedule. Last month, De Beers informed site holders that it would postpone its August site and combine it with its October sale to take place in September. That's a corporate way of saying they cancelled the next sale and that they were bringing the October sale forward by a month to September. Instead of 2 sites between August and October, there'll be one, and it's taking place in September. I don't know why it sounds more complicated than it is. So the first question is, why did De Beers do that? Well, it reflects the weak state of the market. They couldn't sell the rough in August. There's been very little appetite for rough diamonds as manufacturers' inventory of polished remains high. Remember, the manufacturer's job is to buy rough diamonds and to transform those to polished ones, which they then sell to the dealer and consumer markets. If they're holding too many polished diamonds, they don't want to add to that by feeding their factories with more rough. So cancelling the site gave manufacturers some breathing room, alleviating their obligation to buy the rough required of them in their contracts and allowing them to focus on selling polished and on reducing their inventory. Once they've done that, and if it's successful and polished inventory comes down, then when retail jewelers need goods again, manufacturers dip back into the rough market to satisfy the demand. Theoretically, freezing rough buying gets the ball rolling again and stimulates the trading cycle. The timing of this move is significant as it was designed to bring about that bounce when demand is at its peak, which for the trade should be September, October, when retail jewelers are preparing their inventory for the holiday season. So in theory, manufacturers will have depleted their inventory and require new, fresh, polished inventory to supply the retail jeweler customers just when they need it. The other point about the timing is that India needs to have all these polished goods available and ready before their factories and businesses close for the Diwali festival, which this year takes place on October 31st. Before we get to the question of precedent, though, I want to make an observation that might be a little contentious. Consider who is influencing the decision to cancel the site. Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. We're not in the period of the De Beers of old, in which the majority of rough production was sold through De Beers channels, enabling it to withhold supply to support the market and prices in a downturn. Today, buyers have other options from whom to buy their rough, and although De Beers does hold a significant share of the rough market, estimated at about 25%, in this new environment, De Beers responds to the needs and messaging of manufacturers, the rough buyers. Maybe there's only a subtle difference between the way things were then and what I'm describing today. One way or another, the response is to withhold supply. But I think it's quite significant because there has been a change in the power dynamic over the last decade or two. And we saw that play out again in August when manufacturers, predominantly in India, said to De Beers, "We're not prepared to buy rough in this market environment." And De Beers responded by cancelling the site. So who is the bigger influencer in the supply of diamonds to the market today? It's not De Beers, it's not El Rosa or any other mining company. In my opinion, it's the Indian manufacturing fraternity, a group of tightly knit companies who wield enough influence that if they decide not to buy rough, and they do so collectively, the mining companies will have no choice but not to sell, despite the contracts that might obligate them. And that's where we have some precedent to draw from when we consider our original question of whether we have other examples of freezing rough sales and what the impact was. The most famous example was in 2008 during the financial downturn, when the Indian industry put a moratorium on rough imports to the country for 2 months. That was a masterstroke for the local industry and enabled India to recover faster than other centers. In fact, it was arguably the moment in which India set itself apart from other trading and manufacturing centers. For 2 months, no rough came to the largest manufacturing center, which also gave the Indians a boost of liquidity when money was a scarce commodity. Remember, the rough market is a cash market. You pay on the spot, but manufacturers typically sell polished on credit. So there was then, as there is now, a lag in cash flow. In 2008-09, we have an example in which supply constraints enabled the market to realign supply with the lower levels of demand. But there was a caveat, because that was followed by a gradual recovery in the United States and a massive expansion in China, which stimulated growth. So in that instance, withholding supply may have laid the groundwork, but ultimately it was demand that stimulated growth. That experience set a precedent for the industry's crisis management strategy. We saw a similar voluntary freeze of rough imports to India during COVID, but in that circumstance, the miners didn't have the ability to sell or produce for a period physically anyway. Plus, again, we had a strong recovery out of the pandemic when there was a release of pent-up demand in the United States. So it was ultimately a boom in demand that helped realign the market after the downturn, and not that initial withholding of supply. The most recent example was just a year ago when that recovery from COVID withered away, and it was evident that China would remain weak, and the market slowed. You felt the sluggishness. India again implemented a voluntary freeze on rough imports. It was similar timing to today in October, just before the holiday season, and the US holiday season was okay last year, but it did not spark a sudden spike in demand. It wasn't extraordinary. And the impact of that drop in supply that the Indian manufacturers enacted was very short-lived as a result. We saw that overhang of excess inventory in the market throughout 2024 in the midstream. The lesson we take from that is that halting supply, cancelling a site, is really a short-term fix unless it's accompanied by a meaningful rise in demand. So will it work this time? We will likely see some stability in these final 4 months of the year, given that there has been less rough available and given that demand should increase for the holiday period, both due to seasonal factors and due to encouraging rise in marketing activities that we'll see. We're already hearing that some of the rough tenders were quite busy in the last week with the beers off the market. The deeper question, though, is if there will be a lasting impact. Frankly, these short-term fixes are artificial, even if they're necessary. So the market will likely stabilize in the fourth quarter, fine. But what happens in 2025? Are we going to relive this oversupply scenario? And the shadow hanging over the industry for the next year is that the mining companies, particularly De Beers and I think Alrosa too, are holding large inventories of rough that they haven't been able to sell in 2024. I've said it before, I think the market requires fewer diamonds than it is currently holding. And I think that we will see that play out next year, firstly at the production level and secondly in the rough market. Unless, of course, we can stimulate demand to such an extent that we really broaden the scope of diamond demand. That's not out of the realms of possibility, but it will take a concerted effort, particularly among retail jewelers. So I hope that answers the question that we began with. I love that I got the question. It's what I want this channel to be all about. So smash that like button and let me know your thoughts, and let me know if you have any other questions. For now, will constraining supply be enough to restore balance in the market in a sustainable way? It's a crucial question. Thanks for watching, you guys. I'm Avi Kravitz, and I'll see you next time.